Lois.
Hi, Adrienne. How are you today?
Great, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. It's so good to be back with you as always.
Yes. Today we are talking about career visioning. So the news has been blowing up with layoffs all over the tech sector. There's news of small business hiring, there's news of big companies firing, and everybody in the middle is just trying to figure out what is the next step for them. So, what is a vision for a career?
So, a vision for your career is really about clarifying your definition of success at a specific point in the future. Now, when we take a step back, we always want to remember that your vision is personal and professional. It's necessarily holistic. So, even when you're thinking about your vision for your career, it's not in a vacuum. It doesn't stand alone. It's not like sort of its own little silo. That doesn't mean that you can't or shouldn't get really clear around the vision that you have for your career. But I also want you to remember that it's not just that. Your life that you want to create is about so much more than just your work. And you also want to make sure that the career that you're building is also helping you create the life that you want, and that you're not just solely focused on your career and then you end up getting that, but then realizing that that actually really drains you in your personal life. So just that's something to keep in mind, that while you're building out your career vision, it is part of your whole vision, which is about the whole life that you're creating, not just the work life you're creating. But a vision for your career is like, sorry, go ahead.
So that lends itself to the next question really nicely, which is, how is a career vision different from a traditional individual development plan or an IDP, which is something that an employee would normally get at work after a couple of months of being there, which might help them break down some goals for the future in relation to their role at the company.
Yes. Oh, so much to dig into here. So one of the things that comes up when you're working at an organization is, like you said, you have the company goals and you have the company objectives and the company initiatives, and then you got your team initiatives and team goals and all that, and kind of filters down to you and what you need to do in your role. And all that's great, and you need to be able to do those things to contribute to where the company is headed. But you also need to ask yourself, is this role a vehicle to help me get where I ultimately want to go in my career, in the life that I'm creating as a whole? And so your vision is about sort of, again, taking a step back from that. When we think about goals, it's often very much, all right, let's sit down, let's do some traditional problem solving. What's the problem right now? How do we fix it? What do we need you to do? Here's how you need to do it differently. Here's what you need to improve. Boom, boom, boom. Let's start thinking about your future. And here's what you need to do. Start knocking these things off your list. And a vision is saying, before we even think about the how could we even create a goal if we don't know where we're headed, right? If we don't know the destination, how can we create the path to get there? So the vision is about really saying, before we think about all those little micro steps and all those little pieces of the puzzle, what am I actually doing here? Why am I even going on this journey? Why am I in this role? Again, how is this role going to be a vehicle to get me where I ultimately want to go, professionally and personally and financially and all of that? And then it's to say, all right, well, what would that look like? What would be the evidence a year from now or 2 years from now that I had gotten to where I wanted to go in my career growth? And so it really activates a different part of our mind, because instead of, again, just kind of writing some different goals and OKRs and KPI, all those things that just get us into the weeds, this is about really saying, what would be the evidence? How would I know? And oftentimes I'll ask people to do that thought experiment of, if I were to, come have lunch with you a year from now, how would I know that you'd really grown professionally without you saying, gee whiz, Lois, I sure have grown professionally over this past year? What would be different? How would you hold yourself? What would be on your calendar? What would you be looking at on your phone or not? Because maybe you're in a role where you're less in the weeds and less in 8 million meetings and doing more big thinking. So you're not just tied to your phone all the time. Maybe you would say, hey, Lois, I can't even meet for lunch because I'm going to be on a plane and I'm speaking at an event next month. So it really helps us kind of think about what would be the evidence that I had gotten to where I wanted to go professionally? What would be different about how I would show up? What would be different about how I started my day, how it felt at the end of the day, the kinds of things that I was doing throughout the day, the type of work that absolutely lights me up? What would it be like if I was doing that? How would I show up differently as a leader, a team member? So once you kind of, and again, just thinking about that, I get goosebumps talking about that, because that's so much more inspiring and invigorating than like, okay, what's the objective? What's the key result? Do we have to get to that? Yes, absolutely. And we will, but we have a much more important question to ask first.
Great. So it sounds like the vision, of course, is a longer term view and a bigger picture view of success for the employee, whereas the IDP is kind of within the role and for the company and defined by, predefined by the company vision and mission. So if you want help and support from your manager participating in kind of a bigger vision for yourself as an employee, how do you recommend that you bring this up to your boss?
So this is, to be honest with you, it's probably going to have to be something that's a bit more self-led, because I think a lot of times managers don't necessarily know how to start this conversation. I mean, we don't teach visioning. That's not a thing. And so if you were to go to them and say, hey, I really want to clarify the vision for my career, they might say something like, oh, great. So you want to talk about your career path or your development plan. And again, none of that's bad or wrong, but it's kind of like very much in a box. Here's the roles we have. Here's the titles you can have. After this, you can move to this. And so while that's all fine and well, what we're talking about here is you really going inward and saying, what is my definition of success at that specific point in the future, whether it's a year or 2 years, whatever the timeline is for you, not anyone else's. It may not be my manager's definition of success because they might never have had somebody like me before. Or maybe it's really about saying, this isn't my old definition of success for my last role because I had a very specific way of thinking, and that's how I really thought success would show up for me. And maybe I did in that last job or role or company, but now I'm here. So it's time to kind of release that and think about, what's my definition of success for this next chapter? And
Right.
so because sometimes your manager might look at you like, I don't really know how to help you with it. What I recommend is literally starting with a single sentence. And that is sitting down and writing, it is, and then whatever today's date, you pick a year from now or whatever your timeline is. So right now it's January 26th. So it is January 26th, 2024. And I'm so proud of the career that I've created for myself, or the career development that I've experienced, or I'm so proud of the professional growth that I have created for myself over this past year or 2 years, whatever that might be. And so with that first sentence, we've done a few things. We've already started writing it in the present tense, like it's already happened. And so what you're doing is essentially creating sort of like a memory of the future. One of my amazing clients, Kevin Bailey, who is a phenomenal CEO of Dream Fuel and has a team of great mindset coaches for elite performers and elite people in business, elite CEOs and their teams. He uses that phrase, a memory of the future. And while that may sound like an oxymoron, it really is this idea of, if we can sort of drop ourselves into that future state and really hear it and see it and smell it, touch it, taste it, feel it, then our brain doesn't actually know if that is real, if that's a true memory, or if it's something that we just kind of made up. And so when we kind of create that for ourselves, then our brain is like, oh, that's our reality. We're just catching up to it now. So when you write that vision in the present tense, you're also sort of making that declaration that I am making my professional growth happen. My job isn't going to just happen to me. I'm not just going to kind of sit back and see what happens over the next year and like go with the, just be reactive and let things happen. I'm going to be really intentional and really proactive about making this happen.
So what do you do when you don't have the support in your current role to get access to mentors or courses or technology that might further your skills and get you closer to that vision? What do you do if you're kind of working uphill?
Yeah, if you're working uphill, there's a few ways to go about it. One is, I have been putting together more and more free resources, so know that you can always tap into that. If you have a professional development budget, that also is a place where you can say, look, I might not be taking a course to learn more about agile or change management, but I can take a course about clarifying my vision. And that can also be incredibly powerful. And ultimately, right, the more the company is investing in you, the more you're going to invest in the company. So maybe you have a set professional development budget that you can use however you want. But if you feel like you need to kind of go to your boss and present that, then I would say, look, with intention and with clarity comes speed. So if you want me to excel in this role and accelerate my ability to add value to this company, then kind of like the number one thing that would be most beneficial for me is resources to help me gain clarity on what that looks like. Because then, manager, I can work backwards from that vision with you, and we can create the roadmap to get there together. And so that's where then you're helping them connect the dots with, this is where I want to go. This is what I want to create. Don't get me wrong. We're still going to create the roadmap. I'm going to have my OKRs. I'm going to get my quarterly goals in. We're going to have all that you feel like you need, but you're going to be now seeing and working with somebody who is growing into the leader that they want to be, because that's part of their vision, rather than just the person who shows up every day and does the job.
And they understand how work fits into their whole life. So they're more intentional and deliberate about how they show up and integrate.
Yeah.
So
I mean, with retention being such an issue and burnout, I mean, like if a manager can do one thing and they can retain their best people, they want to do that however they can. They might not realize or know or even think to ask about the vision, or, well, if I'm going to retain you, then this job is really going to have to be a vehicle to get you where you want to go. Where actually is that? The other
right.
thing that's really critical is that I worked with an organization back when I was in Birmingham, and they had a team of executives, and I was leading full day vision, in-person visioning workshops at the time. And they sent several different executives to different workshops, not all together. They really wanted that executive to go and not necessarily be with their colleagues, so they could be more open and honest and candid with the group that was there. And these were small, intimate groups, about 15 leaders in each workshop. And so what they were able to do is, again, clarify the vision, not just for their work, but for their whole life. And then when they came back, they were so much more invigorated about how that role could help them get there. And so the company didn't have to do anything. The company didn't have to say, hey, this is really going to get you where you want to go, and get them all jazzed up. They really did that on their own by clarifying their vision. Now, they also had somebody come who was, everyone on the team loved her. But after clarifying her vision, she realized that that company wasn't a vehicle to get her where she wanted to go. And the company had been struggling for months trying to move her to different departments and make it work and make it work. And it was just kind of this huge energy and time and resource drain for everyone involved. And after she came back, she just was able to say, guys, it's actually time for me to go somewhere else. And they were thrilled for her. They were thrilled because now, instead of having to spend more months trying to find a place, it was this mutual realization of her coming to them and saying, my vision, in order to get to my vision, I need a different vehicle. So I'm going to head over there.
And that's how powerful that is that you can start to use it as a guidepost for the question of, when is it really time for me to go? Because I know a lot of people struggle with that.
Yes.
So my last question for you is a twofer. I have a lot of people come to me when I was a manager, and they have really, really big goals. They want to be, they would ask, what's the level above that on the leveling path? And I'd say, oh, well, that level doesn't exist yet. So president of the universe. And they'd say, how do I get there? And so what do you recommend for folks who are really shooting for the stars? And what do you recommend for folks who are just struggling? Like right now, they're asking themselves, do I stay or do I go? So there's, a lot of people who are overly ambitious. How do I get to level, 29 million? And then there are people who are like, I don't even know where to go.
Yeah. So the first question is such a good one. And this brings me right back to when I worked at Zingerman's, this amazing deli that I worked at in Ann Arbor, where I really learned about the power of vision. And for them, literally everything starts with the vision. So I was the head of their corporate gifts department, and it was a new division that we were sort of standing up. And after that first holiday season, where we sort of had I was officially in place as the leader of that group, that very, very small group at the time. I said, February and March are the slowest times of the year. Gifting season is done. How about I go on this sabbatical to meet new artists and food producers and bring items back to the tasting team? Now, instead of just sitting down for an hour and talking about that, my boss was like, what's the vision? Like, before I even think about sending you on this trip, or like, write the vision. So what did that do? It ensured that I wasn't just talking a big game. I wasn't just saying, I want the next level, I want the next role, I want to do this thing, and then just taking a bunch of his time to talk through what that could look like. He really put it on me to say, great, I love that you're ambitious. What would that look like? You tell me. If you can show me the vision and I can really see where that's headed, then I can buy into it and help you get there. But like, let's be honest, if you can't even pick up a pen and write the vision, then this isn't going to go anywhere. So as a manager, you can also put it back on them and say, you tell me, what's the vision? You want to be level 29 million? Amazing. When do you think you're going to get there? 2 years? Great. Sit down, write it out. Write me a paragraph, sit down, put your phone timer on for 5 minutes. What does it look like? How would you know you got there? And if they show that to you and you're like, damn, okay, I could really see this happening. Amazing. Let's work backwards and figure out how to get there. But I guarantee you 9 out of 10 of those people will never write the vision. And then you kind of know where they're at, right? So then you can say like, hey, I love you talking a big game. Come back to me when you have some more clarity around that. So I do think it's really critical to know as a manager, when you have those people coming to you, It's exciting that they're ambitious, but they need to show you what that vision looks like instead of just continuing to bring more ideas and dumping them on your table and then wondering why they didn't happen. So that's the first part of your question. The second part of the question is for people who are just stuck wondering what's next. One of the most important pieces about a vision that often gets lost when we hear about manifesting and creating your dream life and is that's great, but it can feel very woo-woo and very fluffy and nebulous. And ultimately your vision has to be a decision-making filter. It has to help you clarify what is getting me closer to and farther away from where I ultimately want to go. And so for that person who's feeling really stuck, I want you to think of two questions. The first question is that repeating that to yourself, is this current role and the future that I see in it, is that getting me closer to where I ultimately want to go or further away? Now you might be thinking, but I don't know where I ultimately want to go. And so we can also get there and clarify that. But I would venture a guess that you have a gut reaction when you ask yourself that question. You're going to have a gut reaction. And I want you to really listen to it. The next thing I want you to keep in mind is that when we're in a position that, whether it's in a job or a relationship or whatever it might be in, that we don't like or doesn't feel right, or we're trying to get validation or justification for leaving, we start to kind of build up a case in our mind. And we start thinking, well, I don't want this, and I don't want that, and I don't want this, and I don't want that. And so we start thinking, how can I move away from what I don't want? But the visionary mindset is really flipping the switch on that. And it's not about moving away from what you don't want. It's saying, how do I move towards what I do want? And so the critical thing that can happen there is if you're just saying, I don't want to work with this team, and I don't want to have the annoying hours, and I don't want the commute, and I don't want the hybrid environment that they haven't figured out that's not working, and I don't want to, and I don't, then you might end up leaving without a second thought or struggling to find a new thing. But it's really hard to find a new thing when all you know is what you don't want, because then you're just sort of already looking at the next thing and how they're not going to do it right either. But if you were to say, well, what do I want? I do want to lead. I want to have a team I'm excited about. I want to be able to use my skills in a way that doesn't feel like it's stifled by 8 million meetings. Then that could open you up and to say, well, maybe that's something that I could still create within this company. Maybe it's a different department. Maybe it's a different division. Maybe it's a different location. And maybe that doesn't exist, but maybe it does. And so now instead of just cutting and running, you're actually allowing yourself to say, what do I want? And now when you do that, it kind of illuminates all these options around you of how you could get there that oftentimes you just didn't even see before. They were there, you just couldn't see them because you were just focused on moving away from what you didn't want, which is, again, a very reactive place to come from. The visionary mindset is all about that very proactive, intentional step forward.
What else do you want people to know about visioning for their career?
Once you have this tool of visioning in your back pocket, it is something that you can bring out whenever and however you need to. So I think of vision kind of like an accordion. You can extend it out. It can be that long-term vision, or it can be this micro vision for a really challenging conversation you have to have with somebody on your team, or a conversation you have to have when you need to manage up, or whatever that might be. And so again, when we really break it down, it's all about your vision is your definition of success at a specific point in the future. And so that allows you to think, what's my vision for this project? What's my vision for this hard conversation? What's my vision for this next step of my career? What's my vision for growing my team? It really, really transforms everything and puts it into a different light. And again, it was just this tool that you kind of always have and you can bring out at any time. So once you got it for life. But you got to build the muscle. Visioning is like a muscle. The more you work those muscles, the stronger they become.
Visioning every day, baby.
Every day.
Thank you, Lois.